At my wife's funeral, the scent of lilies still fresh in the air. My son stepped toward me, with his wife gripping his arm, both of them staring at me, as if grief had no place on my face. He leaned in close enough that I could feel his breath and said, "You're dead to us too." His words cut through the prayers, the whispers, the quiet sobs of the people who had come to honor the woman I loved. I felt something inside me crack, but I didn't bow. I lifted my head and replied, "Then, here's your mother." His last wish. The room froze. A dozen heads turned, a few gasps echoed between the pews. Even the pastor lowered his book, waiting for what would follow. My son's smirk faltered just slightly. The truth is, betrayal looks different when daylight hits it, and humiliation stings twice as hard when wrapped in funeral black. They thought they could bury me along with her memory, but they had no idea what she had left behind, or what I had been holding on to all this time. Today I will tell you the story of how a grieving husband became the man they never expected to face, how their cruelty opened a door they never saw coming, and how one final request from the woman they dismissed gave me the strength to rise again. If you stay with me, you will witness every twist, every secret, and the moment everything they built came crashing down, because sometimes the last wish of the dead is the beginning of someone else's reckoning. My name is Luther Grant. I'm 70 years old, a retired electrical contractor who spent 40 years building homes across Central Texas. I thought I understood how things were built to last foundations, wiring marriages. 45 years with Margaret taught me that love was the strongest current of all I never imagined I would learn. Standing beside her casket, just how quickly that current could be cut. The church smelled of lilies and old wood scents that would forever remind me of loss. I stood in the front pew of Grace Fellowship in Austin, close enough to touch the polished oak casket where my Margaret lay in eternal stillness. The morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across her face. And I thought how she would have loved that light. She always said churches felt closer to heaven when the sun came through. Just right now, she was closer to heaven than any of us. And I was left behind in a world that suddenly felt foreign and cold. 45 years, that is what the pastor said during the service. 45 years of marriage, of shared meals and quiet evenings of arguments that never lasted past sunset, and laughter that filled every room she entered. He spoke of her kindness, her faith, her devotion to family. What he did not say, because he did, I know, was that Margaret had also been my shield. She stood between me and the sharper edges of life, softening blows I never even saw coming without her. I realized I was exposed. I felt their eyes on me before I heard their whispers. My son Aaron stood near the back of the church with his wife Brianna, their heads tilted toward each other in private conversation. Aaron, I was 42 years old, a man I had raised with my own hands, taught to ride a bicycle, helped through college, walked down the aisle at his wedding. But the man whispering to Brianna was a stranger. He glanced at me with something that looked less like grief and more like impatience, as if the funeral were an inconvenience delaying more important matters after. The service mourners formed a line to offer condolences. Old friends squeezed my hands. Neighbors from decades past embraced me with tears in their eyes. Margaret had touched many lives, and they came to honor her memory. But through it all, I watched Aaron and Brianna hang back waiting. When the last mourner stepped away, Brianna approached with the precision of someone who had been counting the minutes. She did not offer sympathy. She did not mention Margaret's name. Instead, she said, "We need to talk about the arrangements. Luther, the house, the accounts. There are decisions to be made, and we should handle them quickly, while everything is still fresh." My wife was not yet in the ground, and this woman was already dividing the estate. I looked at Aaron, hoping to find my son behind those familiar features, but he avoided my gaze. His silence was louder than any words. "Aaron," I said quietly, "can we speak privately, just the two of us?" He finally looked at me, but his expression held no warmth, whatever you need. To say get, you can say in front of Brianna, she's family. The word twisted in my chest like a blade. I had built this family with Margaret brick by brick, year by year. Now my own son was drawing lines that placed me on the outside. Brianna smiled, but it never reached her eyes. She placed a hand on Aaron's arm, a gesture of possession rather than comfort, and gave him a look I did not understand, but Aaron understood it perfectly. He straightened, took a breath, and delivered words that shattered what remained of my composure. Mom's gone now, Dad. And honestly, you're dead to us too. The air left my lungs. I heard gasps from nearby mourners who had not yet departed, but I did not crumble. 40 years of contract negotiations of difficult clients and impossible deadlines had taught me to hold steady when the ground shifted beneath my feet, so I stood there absorbing the blow, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable for everyone except me. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew. Margaret's old leather wallet, the one she had carried for 30 years. If that's how you feel, I said, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hands, then let me show you her last wish. I noticed a woman standing apart from the remaining mourners. She was perhaps in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair and an expression I could not quite read. She watched the scene unfold with an intensity that seemed personal, as if she recognized something in the cruelty playing out before her. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a small nod, almost imperceptible, before looking away. Everyone fell silent as I opened the wallet and removed an old silver card with an engraving that caught the light. The words etched into the metal read Legacy Access. Nick Brianna's eyes narrowed. She had never seen this before, and for the first time since she approached me, uncertainty flickered across her face. I stood there holding the card, watching Brianna's confusion give way to something darker, and my mind traveled back to the moment. Margaret had placed it in my hands 2 weeks earlier in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic, and fading hope my wife had prepared me for a battle I did not yet know was coming. The cancer had moved quickly in those final months, stealing her strength piece by piece, until she could barely lift her head from the pillow. But her mind remained untouched, sharp as the day I married her, perhaps sharper. The nurses commented on it with admiration. Most patients at this stage drift. One of them told me, your wife is still running the show. They did not know how right they were. Margaret waited until we were alone, until the door clicked shut, and the shuffle of footsteps faded down the hallway. Then she gripped my hand with a strength that startled me, her thin fingers pressing into my palm like she was trying to transfer something vital through touch alone. Luther, she whispered, her voice barely louder than the hum of the machine surrounding her. I need you to listen carefully. I know what's coming. I've seen who Brianna really is. I leaned closer, confused by the urgency in her tone. We had discussed Brianna before. Of course, I had shared my concerns about how she seemed to dominate Aaron, how she controlled their finances and their social calendar, and increasingly their visits to us. But Margaret had always counseled patience, give her time. She would say Aaron chose her. And we must respect that now. In this sterile room with death hovering at the edges, her tune had changed completely. What do you mean? I asked, what have you seen? She did not answer directly. Instead, she reached beneath her pillow and withdrew a small silver card, the same one I now held at her funeral. She pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. This is a Legacy Access card from First National Bank. I opened the account in 1994, the year Aaron graduated high school. I've been adding to it ever since, quietly, without telling anyone. The access code is our wedding anniversary. Memorize it. Never write it down. Stared at the card. Its surface cool against my skin. Margaret? What is this about? Why are you telling me? Now her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She always been stronger than me in the ways that mattered. When they betray you, Luther, and they will use this card. Go to the bank. Everything you need is there. Documents, money, proof. I've spent years preparing for this moment, praying it would never come, knowing it probably would. The word betrayal hung in the air between us. I wanted to argue to defend our son, to insist that family would never turn against family. But something in her expression stopped me. She had never looked at me with such certainty, such sorrowful knowledge. I know what it feels like. She continued, her voice dropping even lower, to be unwanted in your own family. I won't let that happen to you. I won't let her take everything we built. The words struck me as strange. Margaret had always spoken fondly of her childhood, her parents, her siblings. What did she mean, unwanted? I opened my mouth to ask. But she shook her head slightly, as if that story was for another time, or perhaps no time at all. Pastor Reeves knows everything, she said. Find him when you're ready. He's holding something for you. Something. I couldn't risk leaving anywhere else. She paused, her breathing growing more labored, and Luther promised me one thing: don't let her take your dignity. Fight back. But fight smart. Dignity is all we ever really own. Everything else can be stolen, I promised. What else could I do? My wife lay dying and trusting me with secrets I did not understand, and all I could offer was my word. The medication pulled her towards sleep. Her eyelids fluttered, and I thought she had drifted off. But then her lips moved one final time, forming words. I had to strain to hear the neighbor. She breathed, Nora, she'll understand. Then she was gone, not dead yet, but somewhere beyond my reach, leaving me alone with a silver card, a code and questions that would haunt me for weeks. I didn't sleep the night after the funeral. I sat in the living room Margaret had decorated 30 years ago, surrounded by photographs of a life that now felt like a story. Someone else had lived. Her words echoed in the silence. The neighbor, Nora. She'll understand. I did not know any neighbor named Nora did not understand what Margaret wanted me to find, but I kept the silver card in my pocket, pressed against my chest like a talisman, and waited for morning to bring clarity. What morning brought instead was Brianna. She arrived at 9 hours sharp, her car pulling into my driveway with the precision of someone who had been planning this visit for longer than one night. Aaron sat in the passenger seat, and I watched through the window as Brianna spoke to him, gesturing toward the house, her expression animated and determined. Aaron nodded along like a puppet, whose strings had been pulled so many times he no longer noticed the hands controlling him. I opened the door before she could knock. Some instinct told me not to let her set the terms of this encounter, not to give her the satisfaction of summoning me like a servant in my own home. She said, brushing past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk about the practical matters. I know yesterday was emotional, but life moves forward, and there are things that need to be handled. Aaron followed her inside, his eyes fixed on the floor. He did not greet me. He did not offer condolences for the mother we had buried less than 24 hours ago. He simply stood near the doorway, like a guard awaiting orders. Brianna walked through the living room, as if conducting an inspection, her gaze sweeping over the furniture, the paintings, the china cabinet Margaret had inherited from her grandmother. I could almost see her calculating values, assigning prices, men totally liquidating 45 years of memories into dollar signs. Let's be honest, she said, turning to face me with a smile that held no warmth. You're 70 years old, Luther. You can't maintain this place alone, the yard work, the repairs, the bills. It's too much for a man. Your age, especially now that Margaret is gone. Aaron and I have discussed it, and we think the best thing for everyone is if we take over the house, the accounts, the cars. We'll handle everything, so you don't have to worry. The audacity of her words stole my breath for a moment. She spoke as if she were offering charity, as if stripping me of everything I owned was an act of kindness rather than theft dressed in concern. No, I said the word came out quieter than I intended, but firm. Brianna's smile flickered. Excuse me, I said no. This is my home, Margaret, and I built this life together and I intend to continue living it. I appreciate your concern, but I don't need anyone to take over anything for a moment. Something ugly flashed across her face, a glimpse of the creature beneath the polished surface. Then it vanished, replaced by exaggerated patience. Luther, be reasonable. You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. We're trying to help you. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, I replied, and my answer is no. That was when the mask slipped entirely. Brianna's composure cracked like thin ice, and the coldness beneath poured through. Fine, she snapped. You want to be stubborn. Let me be clear about something. You're dead weight. Luther, a burden. Aaron has spent years tiptoeing around your feelings, pretending to care about your opinions, and for what? So you could sit in this house hoarding money that should be going to your grandchildren. Margaret coddled you, but Margaret is gone. And without her protecting you, things are going to change. I looked at Aaron, hoping to find some flicker of protest. Some sign that my son still existed beneath the shell Brianna had constructed around him, but he only shifted his weight from one foot to the other and mumbled something that sounded like agreement. My hand moved to my pocket. Fingers finding my phone. 40 years as a contractor had taught me many things, including the value of documentation. Texas was a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record any conversation I was part of without informing the other party. I pressed the button to activate the voice recorder and kept my expression neutral. I think you should leave, I said calmly. Brianna laughed, a sharp sound without humor. Oh, I'm leaving. But hear this, Luther. You have 2 weeks. 2 weeks to come to your senses and sign over what's rightfully ours. After that, we do this the hard way. She moved toward the door, then paused to deliver her final blow. 2 weeks, then you're out on the street. She swept out of the house, with Aaron trailing behind her. He glanced back once, and for a split second, I thought I saw something like regret in his eyes. Then he was gone, the door slamming shut, leaving me alone in the silence of my violated home. I stood motionless for several minutes, letting my heartbeat slow, processing what had just happened. Then I walked to the front window and watched Brianna's car disappear down the street. As my gaze shifted, I noticed a woman working. In the garden of the house next door, she was perhaps 64 or 65, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore gardening gloves and held a small trowel, but she was not digging. She was watching me. Our eyes met and she set down her tools. Slowly, she walked to the fence that separated our properties and waited there as if giving me the choice to approach or retreat. Something about her stillness, her patience drew me forward. Mr. Grant? She said softly as I reached the fence. I'm Nora Williams. I moved in about 18 months ago, though I don't think we've properly met. I'm so sorry about your wife. Thank you, I managed. She studied my face with an expression I could not quite name. It was not pity, not mere sympathy. It was something deeper, something that suggested she understood a pain beyond ordinary grief. I lost my brother a few years ago. She said grief takes time, Mr. Grant, more time than people want to give you. If you ever need anything, even just someone to sit with in silence. I'm right here. There was weight in her words, a significance I could not yet grasp. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory. The neighbor Nora shall understand. Thank you, Mrs. Williams. I said I may take you up on that. She nodded once and returned to her garden, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night I sat in darkness, unable to turn on the lights Margaret would never see again. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A text from Brianna glowed on the screen. I've already contacted a lawyer. You have no idea what's coming. Enjoy your last days in the house. I set the phone down and picked up Margaret's silver card, turning it over in my fingers. Legacy Access 1994. Our wedding anniversary is the code tomorrow. I decided tomorrow I go to the bank. Whatever. Margaret left for me. It was time to find out. I drove to First National Bank. On the morning of the third day, having spent 2 restless nights, turning Margaret's words over in my mind, like stones in a tumbler, the silver card sat in my breast pocket, its weight insignificant, yet somehow heavy, with the burden of secrets. I did not yet understand whatever Margaret had prepared, whatever she had hidden away for years without telling me. I was about to discover it. The bank occupied a corner of downtown Austin, a stately building of limestone and glass that had stood there since before I was born. I had driven past it thousands of times without ever stepping inside. Margaret handled most of our banking at a branch closer to home. Now I understood why she had kept this account separate, hidden, unknown even to me. The lobby was quiet on a Tuesday morning, only a few customers waiting in line for the tellers. I approached the nearest window where a young woman with bright eyes and a practiced smile greeted me with corporate cheerfulness. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" I placed the silver card on the counter between us. "I need to access this account." She picked up the card, examining it with a furrowed brow. Her fingers turned it. Over searching for a barcode or magnetic strip finding, neither the confusion on her face deepened. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't recognize this type of card. It's not in our current system. Are you sure this is from First National?" "It's from 1994. I said my wife opened the account 30 years ago." The teller's expression shifted toward polite dismissal. She was young enough that 1994 probably seemed like ancient history, a time before she was born, irrelevant to modern banking. "Sir, I'm not sure we can help you with something. That old, our systems have been updated several times since then. Perhaps if you have other documentation, is there a problem here?" The voice came from behind me, calm and authoritative. I turned to find a woman in her mid-40s approaching, her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, her suit immaculate. She wore a name tag that read Olivia Ward, Branch Manager. "This gentleman has an old card." The teller explained, "from 1994. "I don't know what to do with it." Olivia Ward reached for the card, and the moment she saw it, her demeanor changed entirely. The professional politeness gave way to something closer to reverence. "Sister," she said quietly, "please come with me." She led me through a door marked Employees Only and down a hallway to a private office. The room was modest but comfortable, with leather chairs and a mahogany desk that spoke of old money and older traditions. She closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit. "Mr. Grant," she said, reading my name from the card's engraving. "Do you know what you're holding?" "My wife gave it to me before she died. She told me to come here when I was ready." Olivia nodded slowly. "This is a Founder's Legacy card. We only issued 12 of these in 1994. To our most significant early investors, your wife purchased shares in a technology startup through our special investment program 3 decades ago. That startup eventually became one of the largest tech corporations in the world." She typed something into her computer, her eyes scanning the screen. When she looked up, her expression held a mixture of respect and wonder. "The account has been dormant, waiting for activation by the card and a personal code." "Do you have the code?" "June 17th, 1979. I said our wedding anniversary." Olivia entered the numbers. The computer chimed softly, "Mr. Grant, the current value of your wife's investment is approximately $2.3 million. The number hung in the air, incomprehensible. 3 million. Margaret and I had lived comfortably, but modestly, never extravagantly. She had clipped coupons, waited for sales, turned off lights in empty rooms. And all along she had been sitting on a fortune she never touched, never mentioned, never used. There's more. Olivia continued the account. Also grants access to a safety deposit box in our vault. Would you like to see its contents? I could only nod. She led me deeper into the building, through security doors, and down a flight of stairs to the vault. The room was cool and silent, lined with hundreds of small metal boxes. Olivia located the one linked to Margaret's account and used her master key alongside mine to open it. Inside were two items. The first was a thick legal document bound in blue Grant Family Living Trust. The second was a manila folder sealed with red tape bearing a handwritten label in Margaret's familiar script. Private investigation confidential for Luther. When they betray you, Olivia watched my face as I read the label, your wife. Didn't just save money. Mr. Grant, she said softly. It looks like she saved evidence. I carried both items to a private reading room. The bank provided the living trust could wait. It was the folder that called to me at sealed edges, promising answers to questions I had not yet learned to ask. My hands trembled as I broke the red tape. The first page was a cover letter on professional letterhead dated 3 years ago. The investigator's name was printed at the top, along with a Phoenix address below it. Typed in stark black letters were words that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Background investigation, Brianna Hale, Mrs. Grant. I regret to inform you that your suspicions were correct. Subject has done this before. Please see attached file regarding the death of Victor Reyes, Phoenix, Arizona, 2019. I did not sleep that night. The cover letter from the private investigator burned in my mind, and its words searing themselves into my memory. Brianna Hale, Victor Reyes death. But I forced myself to close the folder before reading further. Margaret had prepared this evidence with meticulous care, and I owed it to her to approach it with equal deliberation. First, I needed to understand the legal foundation she had built. The investigation could wait one more day. The living trust document included a handwritten note inside the front cover in Margaret's elegant script. It read, "If you need help understanding this, contact Miles Turner. He helped me create it. You can trust him below." The note was a phone number I called the next morning. Miles Turner answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the measured calm of a man who had spent decades untangling other people's problems. When I explained who I was and why I was calling, he didn't hesitate. Luther Grant. He said, "Margaret told me you might reach out someday. I'm semi-retired now. But for her, I'll make time. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" His office occupied the second floor of an old building near the Capitol, the kind of space that smelled of leather and paper and history. Turner himself was perhaps 55, with gray at his temples and reading glasses perched on his nose. He shook my hand firmly and gestured to a chair across from his cluttered desk. "I'm sorry about Margaret," he said, settling into his own seat. She was a remarkable woman, one of the most forward-thinking clients I ever had. I placed the living trust document on his desk. "She left me this. I understand the basics, but I need to know exactly what it means my daughter-in-law is threatening to take everything." Turner opened the document and began reviewing it, nodding occasionally, his expression shifting from professional interest to something closer to admiration. When he finished, he removed his glasses and looked at me directly. "Mr. Grant, your wife was a genius. Do you understand what she did here? Not entirely." He leaned forward. "Margaret placed all of your family assets into a revocable living trust. The house, the investments, the savings accounts, everything. The trust owns it all. And you, Luther, are the sole trustee. That means you have complete control Over every asset, you decide what happens to the money. You decide who lives in the house. You decide everything. What about Aaron? He's our son. Aaron is listed as a beneficiary. Turner acknowledged, but beneficiary status doesn't give him any rights. While you're alive and competent, he only receives what you choose to give him when you choose to give it. If you decide he gets nothing, he gets nothing. It's entirely at your discretion. The weight of Margaret's foresight settled over me. She had seen this coming perhaps years before I did. She had built a fortress around our life's work and handed me the keys. What about Brianna? I asked. She's been threatening to take the house, to force me out. Turner almost smiled. Your daughter-in-law has absolutely no legal claim to any of this. The house isn't even technically yours anymore. It belongs to the trust, and you control the trust she can threaten. All she wants hire all the lawyers she likes, but legally she's powerless. She cannot touch a single asset without your explicit consent. Relief flooded through me. But Turner was not finished. There's something else. He continued flipping to a specific page in the document. Margaret added a clause here that shows just how carefully she thought this through. If you are ever declared mentally incompetent, control of the trust doesn't pass to family members. It goes to a professional, fiduciary, a neutral third party licensed by the state. Do you understand what that means? I shook my head. It means that even if someone tried to have you declared a Fed, even if they convinced a judge you couldn't manage your own affairs, they still wouldn't get control. The trust would be managed by a professional who has no connection to your family, no incentive to favor anyone. Margaret closed every door, Luther, every single one. I sat in silence, overwhelmed by the scope of what my wife had done for years. She had been quietly constructing this shield while I remained oblivious, trusting in family bonds that were already fraying. Turner's gaze drifted to the manila folder I had brought, but not yet opened in his presence. What's in there? An investigation, I said, into Brianna. Margaret hired someone to look into her background. Have you read it? Not yet, only the cover letter. Turner nodded slowly. Whatever's in there. Mr. Grant, your wife went to a lot of trouble to prepare it. I suggest you read every page, carefully take notes, and think about what you want to do with the information. When you're ready, I'll help you use it. I promised I would read it that night, and I did alone in my living room. With Margaret's photograph watching from the mantel, I opened the folder under lamplight and began to read. The first section was labeled Subject History, Brianna Hale, nee Morrison. The pages that followed told a story that made my hands tremble and my stomach turn. 5 years ago in Phoenix, Arizona, a 68-year-old widower named Victor Reyes had met a charming young woman at his church's grief support group. She was kind, attentive, sympathetic to his loss. Within months, she had become his constant companion. Within a year, Victor had transferred his entire life savings, over $300, into accounts she controlled. 3 months after that, Victor was found dead in his home. The coroner ruled it suicide. The woman's name was Brianna Morrison. I dropped the file as if it had burned me. My son's wife was not just greedy, she was a predator. And if this file was accurate, she may have already killed once before. I picked up the file from where it had fallen and forced myself to continue reading. The night stretched long and dark around me, but I could not stop. Each page revealed another layer of horror, another detail of the calculated destruction Brianna had brought to Victor Reyes's life. By the time dawn light crept through the windows, I had read every document, every photograph, every handwritten note, and I understood finally exactly what kind of monster my son had married. The private investigator Margaret hired had been thorough. His report began with Victor Reyes's background, a retired postal worker in Phoenix, Arizona. 68 years old, widowed after his wife Elena lost her battle. With cancer, Victor had been devoted to Elena for 43 years. Her death shattered him seeking comfort. He joined a grief support group at his local Catholic church. That was where he met a young woman who called herself Brianna Morrison. She was 33 at the time, attractive and attentive with a talent for listening that made grieving men feel understood. The investigator noted that she attended several different grief groups across the Phoenix area, during that period always presenting herself as someone mourning a lost loved one. The details of her supposed loss changed depending on the audience. Sometimes it was a husband, sometimes a father. The lie adapted to whatever would create the deepest connection with her target with Victor. She became his companion within weeks. She cooked meals for him, drove him to appointments, helped him sort through Elena's belongings. His sister, who lived in Texas, noticed the change during phone calls. Victor talked about Brianna constantly praising her kindness, her patience, her understanding when his sister expressed concern about a stranger becoming so involved so quickly. Victor grew defensive. The calls became less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. The isolation was deliberate. The investigator documented how Brianna systematically cut Victor off from everyone who might question her intentions. She screened his phone calls. She intercepted his mail. She convinced him that his family did not truly care about him, that only she understood his pain. Within 6 months, Victor had changed his emergency contacts, removed his sister from his bank accounts, and signed a new will naming Brianna as his sole beneficiary. The financial exploitation followed a precise pattern. First, small amounts for household expenses, then larger sums for supposed emergencies, medical bills, car repairs. Finally, Victor transferred his entire life savings, $340,000 into accounts. Brianna-controlled investigator obtained bank records showing the transfers, each one signed by Victor, in handwriting that grew shakier as the months progressed. 3 months after the final transfer, Victor Reyes was found dead in his home. The coroner ruled it suicide by medication, overdose case closed, but Victor's sister refused to accept that verdict. The file contained newspaper clippings from the Phoenix Gazette where she had spoken to reporters about her suspicions. "My brother would never have done this." She was quoted as saying he was Catholic. He believed suicide was a mortal sin. Someone drove him to this or worse. She filed a civil lawsuit against Brianna for elder financial exploitation, seeking to recover the stolen assets and expose what she believed was foul play. The lawsuit never went to trial. Brianna's attorney, a man with connections to several similar cases across the Southwest, negotiated a settlement with a strict non-disclosure agreement the sister received. A fraction of the stolen money in exchange for her silence, the court records were sealed. Brianna Morrison disappeared from Phoenix and within a year resurfaced in Texas under a new name, Brianna Hale, the name she carried when she met my son. The final page of the file was not typed but handwritten. Margaret's familiar script filling the paper with words, "Meant only for me, Luther. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I discovered this 2 years ago. When something Brianna said at dinner made me suspicious, I hired a professional to confirm everything, and what he found terrified me. I wanted to protect you, but I also wanted to protect Aaron. He's trapped in something he doesn't understand. Married to a woman who sees him as nothing more than a means to an end. Use this information carefully. Don't act in anger and find Nora Williams. She knows more than you think." I stared at those last words, remembering the woman who had spoken to me over the garden fence, the neighbor who lost her brother. Margaret had mentioned her. With her dying breath, the connections were beginning to form in my mind, but I was not yet ready to see the full picture. Then, I noticed something at the bottom of Margaret's note, written in darker ink, as if added later, circled twice for emphasis. Evelyn Hale, Brianna's mother, the investigator found a similar case in Ohio 2007. The pattern is learned behavior. This family has done this before the file slipped from my fingers again. Not just Brianna, her mother too. This was not the work of one, but a family enterprise passed down like a twisted inheritance from mother to daughter, and somewhere in this web of exploitation and death. My son remained trapped, oblivious to the truth about the woman sleeping beside him every night. The revelation about Evelyn Hale consumed my thoughts. For the next day, a mother teaching her daughter how to prey on vulnerable old men, how to steal their savings, and perhaps their lives. The horror of it sat in my chest like a stone, but Margaret's note had given me direction, a path forward through the darkness. Find Nora Williams, and before that, Pastor Reeves. He knows everything. I drove to Grace Fellowship on the morning of the 7th day. The same church where we had buried Margaret less than a week ago. The building looked different in ordinary daylight, less somber, its white steeple reaching toward a cloudless Texas sky. I found Pastor William Reeves in his office at the back of the sanctuary, a modest room lined with books and warmed by morning sun through a single window. He looked up when I knocked on the open door, and something in his expression told me he had been waiting for this moment. He was perhaps 65, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the patient demeanor of a man who had spent decades listening to other people's troubles. "Luther," he said, rising to greet me, "please come in, close the door." I did as he asked and settled into the worn leather chair across from his desk. The pastor studied my face for a long moment. "Before speaking again, your wife told me you'd come. Eventually, she made me promise to wait until you were ready, until you found what she left for you." He folded his hands on the desk. "I take it you've read the file, you knew about it." Margaret confided in me 2 years ago when she first discovered the truth about Brianna. She needed someone to talk to, someone out inside the family who could help her carry the weight. She was terrified, Luther, not for herself, but for you and for Aaron. She knew what that woman was capable of, and she knew that exposing her would tear your family apart. I leaned forward. "Why didn't she tell me we could have confronted this together?" Pastor Reeves shook his head slowly. "Margaret understood something about you that perhaps you don't see in yourself. She knew you would react with anger, that you would confront Brianna directly, and that direct confrontation would give her time to cover her tracks. Margaret wanted to build an airtight case first to gather evidence that couldn't be denied or dismissed. She was protecting you by keeping you in the dark. The logic was sound, even if it stung. Margaret had always been the strategic one, the planner, the one who thought 3 moves ahead while I charged forward on instinct. There's something else," the pastor continued, his voice softening. "Margaret told me about her own pain wounds from the early years of your marriage. She said you saved her once without even knowing it. She wanted to do the same for you." "What do you mean? What wounds?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "That's not for me to tell Margaret." "Left a letter for you, Luther? She wrote it months before she died and entrusted it to me for safekeeping. But she made me promise not to give it to you until everything is resolved, until the threat to your family is past. She said you would understand when the time came. A letter, another piece of Margaret waiting for me in the future." Another voice from beyond the grave. I wanted to demand it, immediately to tear. Open whatever envelope he kept hidden and read her words right now. But I had learned to trust my wife's judgment even in death. "What can you tell me?" I asked instead only that Margaret loved you more than you knew, and that the pain she carried was never your fault. He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope smaller than a letter, more like a note. "She asked me to give you this when you came. It's not the letter, just instructions. Something she wanted you to do before the final confrontation." I took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Margaret's handwriting. "Talk to Nora Williams. She'll understand your pain better than anyone. Trust her. Luther, she's been waiting for you. Nora Williams, I murmured. My neighbor Margaret mentioned her. The pastor said, I didn't understand the connection then. But she said Nora was important, that the two of you shared something neither of you knew about, yet I thanked Pastor Reeves and left the church with more questions. Then answers Margaret had orchestrated something far larger than I had imagined, a network of allies and evidence spanning years, all designed to protect me from a threat I never saw coming. The scope of her love and foresight overwhelmed me. I was halfway to my car when my phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. I answered cautiously. Mr. Grant, the voice on the other end, was female, trembling slightly. This is Nora Williams, your neighbor. Mrs. Williams. I was just thinking about you. I know I saw you at the church. She paused, and I could hear her breathing, as if gathering courage for what came next. I know you've been reading that file, the one your wife prepared. I need to tell you something about it, something about Victor Reyes. The name sent a chill down my spine. What about him? Another pause longer, this time when she spoke again. Her voice cracked with emotion. Held back for years. He was my brother. The words echoed in my mind as I drove the short distance from my driveway to hers. He was my brother, the woman who had offered me kindness over a garden fence, who had spoken of grief and patience, carried a connection to this nightmare far deeper than I could have imagined. Margaret's final whisper in the hospital suddenly made perfect sense, the neighbor Nora. She'll understand. Nora welcomed me into her home. With the quiet composure of someone who had been preparing for this conversation for a very long time. Her living room was modest and warm, filled with comfortable furniture and soft lamplight. But what caught my attention were the photographs. They covered nearly every surface, frames of various sizes, showing the same man at different ages, a young soldier in uniform, a middle-aged postal worker smiling beside a mail truck, an older gentleman dancing with a woman at what looked like an anniversary party, Victor Reyes alive and happy, before Brianna Morrison entered his life. Please sit, Nora said, gesturing to the sofa. I've waited 18 months to have this conversation. I suppose I should start at the beginning. She settled into the chair across from me, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes carrying the weight of years spent seeking justice after Victor died. I couldn't accept what the coroner said. My brother was a devout Catholic. He went to Mass every Sunday, said the rosary, every night believed with his whole heart that suicide was an unforgivable sin. He would never have taken his own life. I knew someone had driven him to it, or worse. She paused, steadying herself. I hired my own investigator. He found evidence of the financial exploitation, the isolation, the way that woman systematically destroyed my brother's life. But by the time I had enough to go to the police, she had disappeared. New name, new state, no forwarding address. How did you find her? I didn't. Your wife found me. Nora's expression softened at the mention of Margaret. 2 years ago, she knocked on my door in Phoenix. She'd hired an investigator to look into her daughter-in-law and his search led him to Victor's case, which led him to me. Margaret told me everything she said. The woman who destroyed my brother was now married to her son, living in Texas, and circling her husband like a vulture, waiting for death. The image struck me with painful accuracy. That was exactly what Brianna had been doing, watching Margaret fade, calculating the value of what would left behind. Margaret had a plan. Nora continued she couldn't expose Brianna directly without tearing her family apart and alerting Brianna to run again. So she needed eyes on the ground, someone who could watch and wait and document, someone who understood exactly what Brianna was capable of, someone who wouldn't back down when things got difficult. She brought you here. I said the pieces falling into place. She helped you buy the house next door. Nora nodded through the trust, anonymously. I sold everything I had in Phoenix, and moved to Austin. My mission was simple: watch over you. Document Brianna's behavior and wait for the moment when you would need a witness. Your wife told me that day would come. She said Brianna wouldn't be able to help herself that Greek. It would eventually expose her for a moment. I could not speak the depth of Margaret's planning, the years of preparation, the network of allies she had quietly assembled while I remained oblivious. She had built a fortress around me without my ever knowing I was under siege. I've been recording everything Nora said, rising to retrieve laptop from a nearby desk. 18 months of documentation. Most of it is routine, nothing actionable. But in the past 2 weeks since your wife's death, Brianna has become careless. She opened the laptop and turned the screen toward me. The first video showed Brianna sitting at an outdoor cafe with an older woman I did not recognize. They leaned toward each other in intense conversation, exchanging documents across the table. That's her mother, Norris. Said Evelyn Hale. She flew in from Ohio last week. According to your wife's investigator, Evelyn has her own history of targeting elderly men. The pattern is learned behavior. She clicked to another video. This one showed Brianna entering a hotel, not an office building. A hotel. A well-dressed man waited for her in the lobby. They embraced briefly before disappearing together toward the elevators. That's her lawyer, Derek Vance. Nora explained they meet there every Tuesday afternoon for hours. The implication needed no elaboration. I watched as Nora advanced the footage to a final frame. Brianna and Derek in the hotel parking lot, her arms around his neck, his hands on her waist, their posture unmistakably intimate. Mr. Grant, I don't think that's just a professional relationship, Nora said quietly. And I don't think their legal strategy is the only thing they're planning together. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, expecting another threat from Brianna. Instead, the message was from Aaron. Dad, I need to talk. Something's wrong. Can I come over tonight? I stared at Aaron's message for a long moment before responding. Something was shifting in my son, some crack forming in the walls Brianna had built around him. I told him to come the following evening, that I would be home and ready to listen. Whatever he had discovered, I needed time to prepare. The next morning, I called Miles Turner and Nora Williams and asked them both to meet me at Turner's office. It was time to connect all the pieces. Turner's conference room had never felt so crowded with evidence. We spread everything across the long wooden table: the private investigator's file, the living trust documents, Nora's surveillance footage queued on her laptop, and a legal pad filled with Turner's meticulous notes. For 3 hours, we reviewed every detail, building a timeline of Brianna's predatory history and her current campaign against me. Turner studied Nora's videos with the focused intensity of a man assembling a puzzle. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. This is bigger than one woman's greed. He said Evelyn Hale was investigated in Ohio in 2007 for a strikingly similar scheme. She befriended an elderly widower named Franklin Dawes, became his companion, gradually isolated him from his family, and drained his accounts over the course of 18 months. By the time his children realized what was happening, nearly $400 had disappeared into accounts they couldn't trace. What happened to the case? I asked, dropped due to insufficient evidence. Evelyn was careful. She never put her name on anything, directly used intermediaries and shell accounts. And when the family tried to pursue civil action, she disappeared. Sound familiar? Turner gestured toward Nora's laptop. The pattern is identical to what Brianna did to Victor Reyes. Target an elderly widower, exploit his grief, isolate him, drain him, vanish. This isn't just Brianna acting alone. This is a family operation. Evelyn taught her daughter everything she knows. Nora spoke up, her voice tight with controlled anger. My brother was practice. Brianna perfected her mother techniques on Victor, then moved on to bigger targets. The Grants. The weight of it settled over me. Margaret had understood this years ago, had seen the shape of the threat before anyone else. She had known we were not dealing with an opportunistic daughter-in-law, but with a trained predator backed by a teacher with decades of experience. What are our legal options? I asked Turner. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and began outlining the framework. Elder financial exploitation is a felony in Texas. If we can prove Brianna intended to defraud you through deception, manipulation, or abuse of a position of trust, she faces serious criminal charges, but here's where it gets interesting. He tapped his pen against the pad. If we can prove Evelyn is actively participating in the current scheme, not just historical patterns, but active involvement, right now we can pursue conspiracy charges. Conspiracy adds additional counts for each participant and significantly increases the potential penalties. How do we prove active participation? We need evidence that Evelyn is directly involved in plan or executing the fraud against you. Statements, recordings, documents with her signature, anything that puts her in the middle of this current scheme right now. All we have is video of her meeting with Brianna that's suggestive, but not conclusive. They could claim it was just a mother visiting her daughter. Nora pulled up her surveillance footage again. I have recordings of 6 separate meetings between Evelyn and Brianna since she arrived in Texas. They meet at the same cafe every other day, always at the same table in the corner, always leaning in close, like they're discussing something confidential. But I couldn't get audio. They're too far from any position where I could place a microphone without being noticed. Turner nodded grimly. Video without audio shows their meeting. But we can't prove what they're discussing for conspiracy charges. We need substance. We need someone who can hear what they're planning and document it. The 3 of us sat in heavy silence, the same thought occurring to each of us simultaneously. Turner voiced it first. We need someone on the inside. My mind went immediately to Aaron's text from the night before something was wrong. He had said he wanted to talk for weeks, my son had been. Brianna's silent accomplice standing beside her as she threatened and humiliated me. But that text suggested something had changed. Perhaps he had finally begun to see through her facade. My son, I said slowly. Aaron sent me a message last night he wants to meet. He said something is wrong. Turner and Nora exchanged glances. Can he be trusted? Turner asked if Brianna suspects he's turned against her. She might accelerate her plans or destroy evidence. I don't know. I admitted he's been under her control for 10 years, but he's still my son. And if he's reaching out now, maybe some part of him is ready to see the truth. It's a risk, Nora said, but it might be our only option. If Aaron can get close enough to record their conversations to document what they're planning, we'd have everything we need. I thought of the boy I had raised, the young man who used to help me in the garage, who laughed at my terrible jokes, who cried at his mother's bedside in those final days that boy was still in there somewhere. Buried beneath years of manipulation, I had to believe that I had to try that night. I waited in my living room with the lights low, and Margaret's photograph watching from the mantel, when headlights swept across the window just after 8 seared, my heart began to pound. I opened the door before Aaron could knock. He looked terrible. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes red and swollen from sleeplessness or tear. He seemed smaller, somehow diminished, as if some vital part of him had been hollowed out when he saw me. His composure crumbled entirely. Dad, he said, his voice cracking on the single syllable. I found something on Brianna's phone messages. Between her and her lawyer, Derek Vance, they've been talking about me like I'm not even a person, just an obstacle to get around. I stepped aside to let him enter, guiding him to the sofa, where he collapsed as if his legs could no longer support him. What did the messages say? Aaron's hands trembled as he pulled out his own phone, where he had taken screenshots of what he discovered. They're planning to have me sign something, some kind of document that gives them control over everything, your assets, the house, all of it. They called it a conservatorship petition? And Dad? He swallowed hard, his eyes filling with fresh tears. The way they talk to each other, the things they say. I think she's sleeping with him. I think she has been for a long time. I took the phone from Aaron's trembling hands and began to read the messages, filled the screen in neat bubbles of betrayal, each one more damning than the last. Brianna and Derek Vance had not been careful. They had written to each other with the casual cruelty of people who believed they would never be caught, who saw Aaron as so thoroughly controlled that the possibility of discovery never crossed their minds. The earliest messages dated back over a year to a time when Margaret was still alive, still fighting her illness, still hoping for more time with her family, while my wife lay dying. Her daughter, her in-law, had been conducting an affair with her own attorney, planning a future that included neither her husband nor her in-laws. I scrolled through the conversation, my stomach turning with each new revelation. The intimate messages were bad enough explicit declarations of desire that left no room for innocent interpretation, but worse were the strategic discussions, the cold calculations about how to maximize their take from what they called the Grant situation. One exchange stood out with particular venom. Derek had written, "How much longer do we have to wait?" Brianna's response made my blood run cold. "Until the old man is out of the picture." Aaron's too stupid to notice anything. He believes whatever I tell him. Once Luther is declared incompetent and I'm appointed conservator, we liquidate everything transferred offshore, and I file for divorce. Aaron gets nothing. He was never going to get anything. I looked up at my son, who sat hunched on the sofa with his face buried in his hands. The man before me bore little resemblance to the cold stranger who had stood beside Brianna at his mother's funeral. That man had been a puppet, strings pulled by hands. He could not see. This man was broken, shattered by the realization of how thoroughly he had been used. I asked quietly. Aaron's voice came out muffled, choked with shame. "The affair, at least a year, based on what I found. But the plan, the scheme against you, I think that started even earlier, maybe from the beginning." He finally looked up, his eyes swollen and red. "Dad, she never loved me? Not once. I was just a way to get to you, to Mom, to everything you built, 10 years of marriage, and I was nothing but a tool." The pain in his voice cut through whatever anger I might have felt toward him. Yes, he had stood by while his wife humiliated me. Yes, he had chosen her over his own parents, time and again, but he had done so believing in a lie, manipulated by a woman who had made deception. Her life's work? Aaron was not my enemy. He was another of Brianna's victims. Gave up everything for her. Aaron continued the words, pouring out like poison from a wound. "I stopped visiting you and Mom. I missed holidays, birthdays, Sunday dinners. Every time you reached out, she found a reason why we couldn't come. Why I needed to keep my distance. And I believed her. I chose her over you, over Mom." His voice cracked completely. "Mom died thinking I didn't love her, and now I find out my whole marriage was a con." I moved to sit beside him on the sofa, something I had not done in years. The distance between us had grown so vast that physical proximity had become uncomfortable. But now, watching my son crumble under the weight of his own blindness, I felt the distance collapse. Aaron listened to me. "I waited until he met my eyes. Your mother never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment, even when she discovered what Brianna was. Even when she spent 2 years preparing for the battle we're fighting. Now she did it to save you, not to punish you. She knew you were trapped. She knew you. Couldn't see the bars of your cage. Everything she built, the trust, the evidence, the plans she left behind, all of it was designed to protect both of us." Aaron shook his head, fresh tears streaming down his face. "How can you forgive me? After everything I said, everything I let her do." I thought of Margaret, of her final words, of the network of protection she had woven around our family. She had known this moment would come, had prepared for it, had left. instructions designed to bring her son back into the fold rather than drive him away forever. Because you're my son? I said simply because your mother would want me to, and because we don't have time for anger. Brianna and her mother are moving fast. They're filing a guardianship petition, trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so they can take control of everything. But we have a chance to stop them, a chance to expose what they really are. I need your help, Aaron. Will you help me protect this family for a long moment? He simply stared at me as if unable to believe what he was hearing. Then something shifted in his expression, a hardening around the eyes, a straightening of the spine. The broken man began to reassemble himself into something stronger. Tell me what to do. Dad, I'll do anything. I took his hand, feeling the tremor in his fingers, the desperate need to make amends. Here's what I need. Go back to Brianna tonight. Pretend nothing has changed. Let her believe you're still the obedient husband. She's always controlled, but from now on, you record everything, every conversation, every phone call, every meeting with her mother and her lawyer. Texas is a one-party consent state. As long as you're part of the conversation, your recordings are legal evidence. Aaron's jaw tightened with new resolve. She's planning something for tomorrow. She mentioned a meeting with Derek about filing paperwork, some kind of petition. The guardianship petition. They're trying to have me declared incompetent. Once that happens, they control everything. I squeezed his hand. We need to know exactly what they're planning when they're filing, what evidence they think they have. Can you get close enough to find out? Yes. The word came out firm, certain. When do we start tonight? Go home? Act normal? And tomorrow when they make their move, we'll be ready. Aaron left my house that night with a mission and a burden he would return to the woman who had betrayed him, sleep beside her, share meals with her, and pretend that nothing had changed. It was a performance that would have broken lesser men, but something had awakened in my son. A steel I had not seen since he was a young man with dreams of his own. Before Brianna had slowly him to her will. Over the following 10 days, he proved himself more capable than either of us had imagined. We established a routine of careful communication. Aaron would text me brief updates during the day, innocuous messages that would raise no suspicion. If Brianna happened to glance at his phone thinking of you, Dad, hope you're doing okay, simple words that carried hidden meanings we had agreed upon in advance at night, when Brianna was asleep or distracted, he would call with detailed reports, his voice low and urgent in the darkness of whatever room he had found for privacy. The first recordings came within 48 hours. Aaron had downloaded an app that allowed his phone to record continuously while appearing to be in sleep mode. He captured Brianna on the phone with Derek Vance discussing the timeline for the guardianship petition. Her voice was confident, almost cheerful, as she laid out her strategy. The hearing should be quick. She told Derek, your father is old and confused. The judge will see that immediately we present the doctor's report. A few examples of erratic behavior, and that recording I made of him rambling about Margaret's so-called legacy. He sounds paranoid, delusional. No judge is going to leave a man like that in control of millions of dollars. Aaron sent me the audio file that night, hearing my daughter-in-law's voice, so casual in her contempt, so certain of her victory, filled me with a cold anger I had not felt in decades, but I did not let it consume me. Margaret had warned me against acting in rage. This required patience and precision. The situation escalated when Evelyn Hale arrived from Ohio. Brianna picked her mother up from the airport and brought her to the house. Aaron had once considered his home that evening. They held what Brianna called a family dinner, just the three of them around the dining room table, wine flowing freely as they celebrated the progress of their scheme. Aaron positioned his phone on the kitchen counter, propped against a cookbook, as if charging the camera captured everything. The audio was clear enough to hear every word. Evelyn dominated the conversation. with the authority of a woman who had done this many times before she coached Brianna on exactly what to say in court, how to present herself, how to manipulate the judge's perceptions. "I've done this 3 times," Evelyn said, laughing as she refilled her wine glass. "Old men are predictable. They get confused under pressure. They get angry when challenged, and judges don't like angry old men. They see aggression as a sign of cognitive decline, especially when there's a concerned family member standing by with documentation." She leaned toward Brianna with a conspiratorial smile. "Make him look paranoid, make him seem unstable, and the rest is easy. Judges want to protect vulnerable seniors. We just have to convince them that Luther is the vulnerable one, not us." Aaron sat through the dinner with a smile frozen on his face, nodding along, playing the role of the obedient husband, while his phone captured every damning word. When he sent me the video that night, I watched it 3 times, memorizing the details, noting the timestamps that would prove Evelyn's active participation in the conspiracy. But the most damning recording came near the end of the second week. Aaron had begun to time his absences, strategically excusing himself to the bathroom, or stepping outside for air at moments when Brianna and Evelyn seemed on the verge of discussing sensitive details. They had grown comfortable with his presence, dismissing him as too controlled to be a threat. The complacency proved their undoing on the 9th day of his mission. Aaron captured a conversation that would seal their fate. Brianna and Evelyn sat in the living room, believing Aaron was upstairs changing clothes. His phone left on the coffee table, beside a stack of magazines, recorded everything once he's declared incompetent. Brianna explained, her voice bright with anticipation. "I become conservator, full control, then I sell everything, the house, the stocks, the accounts." Margaret thought she was so clever, hiding all of it liquidated within 60 days. And the money Evelyn asked Derek has accounts set up offshore, untraceable. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll be in Costa Rica. New names, new lives. Aaron will get the divorce papers in the mail, along with a lovely note explaining that I found someone who actually appreciates me. Evelyn lifted her glass in a toast. "That's my girl. Just like I taught you." The clink of crystal against crystal echoed through the recording like a bell tolling for the dead. Aaron called me late that night, his voice strained from the effort of maintaining his facade. "Dad, they're filing the petition tomorrow morning. They have a doctor, someone named Franklin Moore, who's agreed to sign off on a cognitive decline report. He's an old friend of Evelyn's from Ohio. He's never even met. You never examined you. But he's willing to put his name on a document saying you're mentally unfit." I absorbed the information. Calmly, we had anticipated this. Turner had already arranged for my evaluation with Dr. Elaine, a legitimate psychologist with impeccable credentials. Her report declaring me fully competent sat in a folder on my desk ready to be deployed, but Dad Aaron continued a note of triumph breaking through his exhaustion. "I got everything on tape, all of it. Evelyn coaching Brianna, the plan to steal everything, the offshore accounts, Costa Rica, all of it. What do we do now?" I looked at Margaret's photograph on the mantle. Her smile unchanged, her faith in me, unwavering, even from beyond the grave. "Now we prepare for court," I said. "We let them file their petition. We let them believe they're winning. And when they walk into that courtroom expecting an easy victory, we show them exactly what your mother spent years preparing." Days that followed moved with the deliberate pace of preparation. We had the evidence. We had the strategy. Now we needed to ensure that every piece was in place. Every contingency accounted for. Brianna and Evelyn had filed their guardianship petition, confident in their forged doctor's report and their carefully constructed narrative of a confused old man, and they had no idea what awaited them. My first task was to neutralize their primary weapon. Dr. Franklin Moore had never met me, never examined me. Yet his signature sat on a document, claiming I showed signs of cognitive decline to counter this fraud. I needed an evaluation from a professional whose credentials were beyond reproach. Dr. Elaine Carter came highly recommended by Turner. She practiced in Austin, specialized in geriatric psychology, and had testified as an expert witness dozens of competency hearings. Her office was bright and welcoming, designed to put anxious patients at ease. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Mr. Grant, I understand you're facing a guardianship challenge. My job today is to conduct a thorough cognitive assessment. We'll test memory, reasoning, problem solving, and executive function. It takes about 90 minutes. Are you ready?" I told her I was. The tests were rigorous. She asked me to remember lists of words and recall them after delays. She presented puzzles that required me to identify patterns, complete sequences, and solve problems under time pressure. She questioned me about current events, personal history, and daily routine. She observed my behavior, my speech patterns, my ability to follow complex instructions. When the 90 minutes ended, she set down her clipboard and looked at me with something approaching admiration. "Mr. Grant, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've evaluated hundreds of seniors, some sharp, some struggling, some genuinely in need of help managing their affairs." She paused, letting the words settle. "You're sharper than most people half your age. Your memory is excellent. Your reasoning is sound. Your executive function is intact. There's absolutely nothing wrong with your mind." She signed the evaluation that afternoon, a detailed report that would stand as irrefutable evidence against the fraudulent claims Brianna had assembled 2 days before the hearing. Turner convened our team in his conference room for a final review. Aaron sat beside me, his presence still strange after so many years of distance. Nora occupied the chair across the table, her expression calm but alert. Turner spread our evidence across the surface like a general laying out battle plans. Margaret's living trust documents established that Luther has sole authority over all assets. He began pointing to each item in turn. The private investigation report documents Brianna's history with Victor Reyes Nora's surveillance footage shows Evelyn's active involvement in the current scheme. Aaron's recordings capture both women explicitly discussing their plans to defraud Luther and flee the country, and Dr. Carter's evaluation proves beyond any doubt that Luther is mentally competent. He looked up at us, his eyes sharp with anticipation. We're not just defending against guardianship. We're going to expose a criminal conspiracy, but strategy matters. We let them present their case first. We let them commit to their lies under oath. Then we show the judge exactly who these people really are. The plan was sound. Now we simply had to execute that evening. I found myself sorting through Margaret's belongings, a task I'd been avoiding. Since her death, her closet still smelled of her perfume. Her dresser still held the jewelry she wore on special occasions. Every item carried memories I was not ready to release in the bottom drawer, tucked beneath old sweaters. I discovered a photograph I had never seen before. It showed a family gathering from 40 years ago, one of the early holidays after our wedding. My parents stood at the center of the frame. My mother Eleanor's arm linked through my father's, her smile bright and commanding. Margaret stood at the edge, separate from the group, her expression sad and isolated. No one touched her. No one stood close. I stared at the photograph as buried memories surfaced my mother's coolness toward Margaret. In those early years, the cutting remarks I had dismissed as adjustment difficulties, the way Margaret always seemed to shrink in Eleanor's presence, her usual confidence dimming to something small and uncertain. I had told myself it would get better with time. I had never asked Margaret how it made her feel Pastor Reeves's words echoed in my mind. She told me about her own pain wounds from the early years of your marriage. She said you saved her once without even knowing it. What did Margaret I endured in silence, while I remained oblivious the night before the hearing? My phone buzzed with an incoming text. Brianna's name glowed on the screen, her message dripping with confidence. "See you tomorrow, don't worry, it'll be quick. You won't even know what hit you for the first time in weeks." I smiled. I typed back 4 words, looking forward to it. Then I set down the phone and turned to Aaron and Nora, both sitting at my kitchen table. The photograph of Margaret between us like a talisman. "Tomorrow we finish this," as I said for Victor. "For your mother, for all of us." Travis County Courthouse rose against the morning sky like a monument to justice. Its limestone facade gleaming in the early light. I had driven past this building countless times over the decades, never imagining I would one day climb its steps to fight for my own freedom. But here I was, 70 years old, recently widowed, walking into a battle my wife had spent years preparing me to when Turner met me at the entrance. His briefcase heavy with evidence, Aaron had arrived separately maintaining his cover until the last possible moment he would sit with Brianna and Evelyn playing the dutiful husband. One final time, his phone recording everything as it had for the past 2 weeks. Nora waited inside, ready to testify when called. We entered the courtroom together, Turner and I, and took our places at the respondents' table. The room was smaller than I had expected, wood-paneled and solemn, with an elevated bench where Judge Patricia Hernandez would preside. She had a reputation for fairness and sharp intelligence. Turner had told me she did not suffer fools or tolerate deception. That reputation gave me hope. The petitioner's table sat across the aisle, empty for now, but not for long. Brianna entered first, dressed in a modest navy dress that projected concern and respectability gone, were the sharp edges and cold efficiency I had witnessed at the funeral. In their place was a performance of worried compassion, a daughter-in-law burdened by the painful duty of protecting her confused father-in-law from himself. Evelyn followed close behind, equally transformed, wearing soft colors and a gentle expression that masked the predator beneath. Derek Vance completed the trio. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps 40, with the polished confidence of a man accustomed to winning his suit. Was expensive. His posture commanding, his smile practiced and reassuring. He carried a leather briefcase that no doubt contained the fraudulent documents they planned to use against me. Aaron entered last, his expression carefully neutral. He took a seat beside Brianna without looking at me, maintaining the fiction of loyalty that had allowed him to gather the evidence now sitting in Turner's folder. I felt a surge of pride at his composure my son had found. His courage when it mattered most. Judge Hernandez called the hearing to order, and Derek Vance rose to present his case. He spoke with practiced sincerity, his voice warm with concern, his gestures measured and sympathetic. If I had not known the truth, I might have believed him. "Your Honor, we're here today out of genuine concern for Luther Grant's well-being. Mr. Grant is 70 years old and recently suffered the devastating loss of his wife. Of 45 years since her death, his behavior has become increasingly erratic and concerning. He has changed the locks on his home without explanation. He has consulted multiple attorneys about matters he refuses to discuss with family. He has exhibited irrational hostility toward his own son and daughter-in-law, the very people who have been trying to help him through this difficult time." Derek paused, letting the words settle over the courtroom like a shroud. "We have obtained a professional evaluation from Dr. Franklin Moore, a respected physician with 30 years of experience in geriatric medicine. His report documents early-stage dementia consistent with grief-related cognitive decline. Mr. Grant is no longer capable of managing his own affairs for his own protection and for the protection of the substantial assets he controls. We respectfully request that this court appoint a conservator to oversee his care and finances." He placed the fraudulent report on the judge's bench with a flourish of false humility. "No family wants to be in this position, Your Honor. but sometimes love requires difficult decisions. Brianna dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of reluctant sorrow. Evelyn nodded gravely, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder in maternal support. The performance was flawless. Judge Hernandez reviewed the documents briefly, then turned her attention to our table. Mr. Grant, you've heard the petition. How do you respond? Turner rose from his chair, unhurried and composed, Your Honor. We appreciate the court's time and take these allegations. Seriously, that's why Mr. Grant voluntarily underwent a comprehensive cognitive evaluation last week with Dr. Elaine Carter, a licensed psychologist specializing in geriatric assessment. He approached the bench and placed Dr. Carter's report beside the fraudulent one. Dr. Carter's evaluation, conducted over 90 minutes using standardized testing protocols, concludes that Mr. Grant is completely mentally competent. Her exact words were that he is, quote, sharper than most people half his age, end quote. There is no evidence of dementia, cognitive decline, or any impairment that would justify the appointment of a conservator. I watched Brianna's expression flicker, the first crack in her confident facade. She had not expected resistance. She had expected a confused old man, easily overwhelmed, unable to defend himself. Turner continued, his voice steady. But more importantly, Your Honor, we have evidence that this petition is not about Mr. Grant's well-being at all. It's part of a criminal conspiracy to defraud an elderly man of his assets. Petitioners are not concerned. Family members. They are predators who have targeted Mr. Grant with deliberate intent to steal everything he and his late wife built over 45 years of marriage. Derek Vance shot to his feet. Objection. Your Honor, this is outrageous character. Assassination counsel is making inflammatory accusations without any foundation. Judge Hernandez raised her hand for silence. Her eyes moved between Turner and Derek, assessing, calculating. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority. Overruled. These are serious allegations on both sides. I want to hear everything. She turned to Turner. You claim to have evidence. Counselor present? Turner opened his folder, the one Margaret had spent years helping to prepare. Let's start with how Mrs. Brianna Grant did exactly this to another elderly man 5 years ago. A man in Phoenix, Arizona. A man named Victor Reyes. He paused, letting the name hang in the air. A man who died. Brianna's face went white. The color drained from Brianna's face as Victor Reyes's name echoed through the courtroom beside her. Evelyn stiffened almost imperceptibly. The only crack in her otherwise composed demeanor, Derek Vance remained on his feet, objections forming on his lips. But Judge Hernandez silenced him with a look that brooked no argument. Continue, counselor, she said to Turner. Turner presented the evidence systematically, each document building upon the last like bricks in a wall. He described how Brianna, then using her maiden name Morrison, had met Victor Reyes at a grief support group in Phoenix. How she had come his companion, his confidant, his closest relationship in the wake of his wife's death. How she had gradually isolated him from his family, intercepted his communications, and convinced him that only she truly cared for his well-being. Within 8 months, Turner explained placing bank records before the judge Victor Reyes had transferred $340,000 to accounts controlled by the woman sitting at that table, his entire life's savings gone. And 3 months after the final transfer, Mr. Reyes was found dead in his home. Derek finally found his voice. Your Honor, this is ancient history and completely irrelevant to the current proceeding. My client was never charged with any crime related to Mr. Reyes, that's correct? Turner acknowledged because the family's civil lawsuit was settled with a strict non-disclosure agreement before it could go to trial, but the pattern is relevant. It shows intent methodology and a history of targeting vulnerable elderly men. Judge Hernandez studied the documents, her expression unreadable. Do you have witnesses to corroborate this history? I do, Your Honor. I'd like to call Nora Williams to the stand. Nora rose from her seat in the gallery and walked to the witness box with the dignity of a woman who had waited years for this moment. She wore a simple black dress, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, her hands steady. As she took the oath, Turner guided her through the testimony, gently allowing her to tell Victor's story. In her own words, she spoke of her brother's kindness, his faith, his devotion to the wife he had lost. She described how he had changed after meeting Brianna, how his phone calls became less frequent, how he stopped attending family gatherings, how he seemed to shrink into himself as the months passed the last time I spoke to Victor. Nora said, her voice thick with controlled emotion. He sounded like a stranger. He told me he didn't need family anymore, that he had someone who truly understood him. A month later, he was dead. And what was your reaction to the coroner's ruling of suicide? Turner asked. Nora's eyes found Brianna across the courtroom. My brother did not kill himself. He was a devout Catholic. He believed suicide was a mortal sin that would separate him from Elena forever. He would never have done that. Her voice hardened. He was destroyed by that woman. She took his money, his dignity, his connection to everyone who loved him, and when he had nothing left, he gave up. She took everything from him, including his will to live. The courtroom sat in heavy silence. I saw the judge's jaw tighten, saw the way she looked at Brianna with new understanding, but Turner was not finished, Your Honor. I have one more piece of evidence, an audio recording made by Margaret Grant, the respondent's late wife, approximately 6 months before her death. The recording was made in the presence of her attorney and is legally valid as a sworn statement. He produced a small digital recorder and placed it on the evidence table. My heart began to pound. I had read Margaret's notes, her letters, her instruct, but I had never heard her voice since those final whispered words in the hospital. Turner pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the courtroom, clear and strong despite the illness that had been consuming her when she recorded it. My name is Margaret Grant. I'm making this recording because I may not live long enough. To protect my husband in person, tears blurred my vision. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting to maintain composure as my wife spoke to me from beyond the grave. Brianna Hale married my son to gain access to our family. She is not who she pretends to be. I have proof that she did the same thing to a man named Victor Reyes in Phoenix, Arizona. She befriended him, isolated him, took his money, and when he had nothing left, he died. She took his life as surely as if she had held a weapon, and I believe she intends to do the same thing to my husband. Luther Margaret's voice wavered slightly, the only sign of the emotion she must have felt while recording these words. Luther, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I couldn't tell you sooner. I wanted to protect Aaron too. He doesn't know what he married. He trapped in something he can't see. And I hoped I could free him without destroying him, but I had to choose, and I chose you. I will always choose you. I wept openly now, unable to stop the tears streaming down. My face around me, I heard others crying as well. Even Judge Hernandez reached for a tissue, dabbing at her eyes, while maintaining her professional composure. Everything I did for you. Margaret continued the trust. The investigation, the evidence I gathered, all of it was to protect you when I could no longer be there. Please forgive me for the secrets. I only kept them because I love you. And please, Luther, don't let her win. Don't let her take what we built together. Fight for yourself. Fight for our family, and know that wherever I am, I'm fighting beside you. The recording ended. Silence filled the courtroom like a held breath. Judge Hernandez composed herself, and turn to the petitioner's table, Mrs. Grant, she said, addressing Brianna directly. These are serious allegations supported by documented evidence. Do you have any response? Derek Vance began to rise, prepared to offer some rehearsed denial, some legal maneuvering to deflect and delay. But before he could speak, movement from behind Brianna caught everyone's attention. Aaron stood up, Your Honor. My son said, his voice, despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. I have a response. I have recordings of my wife and her mother planning exactly what they're denying. Conversations about how to have my father declared incompetent, how to steal his assets, how to flee the country with another man. He looked at Brianna, and for the first time she saw the truth in his eyes, and I'd like the court to hear them. Brianna's face contorted with shock as Aaron walked past her toward the witness stand. For 10 years, she had controlled him, manipulated him, convinced him that his own perceptions could not be trusted. Now he moved with a purpose she had never seen, a determination that shattered every assumption she had made about the man she married, Your Honor. Turner said Aaron Grant has been cooperating with our investigation for the past 2 weeks. During that time, he recorded multiple conversations relevant to this proceeding. Texas is a one-party, consent state. And as a participant in these conversations, his recordings are legally admissible. Judge Hernandez nodded proceed. Aaron connected his phone to the courtroom's audio system, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was about to do. The first recording filled the room with Brianna's voice, casual and confident, discussing the guardianship strategy with Derek Vance. The old man won't know what hit him. We present the doctor's report, make him look confused and paranoid, and the judge hands over control simple. The second recording captured Evelyn coaching her daughter on courtroom demeanor. I've done this 3 times. Evelyn's voice said, followed by laughter. Old men are predictable. They get confused, they get angry, and judges don't trust angry old men, make them look unstable, and the rest is easy. But the final recording was the one that sealed their fate. Brianna's voice filled the courtroom, bright with anticipation, as she outlined her endgame to her mother once he's declared. Incompetent, I become conservator, full control. I liquidate everything within 60 days. Derek has offshore accounts ready by the time anyone figures out what happened. We'll be in Costa Rica, new names, new lives. Aaron gets the divorce papers in the mail. Evelyn's response came through clearly. That's my girl, just like I taught you, as the recording played. I noticed movement at the petitioner's table. Derek Vance had risen from his chair and was edging toward the courtroom doors. His polished confidence replaced by the desperate calculation of a trapped animal. A bailiff stepped into his path. Arms crossed, expression impassive. Derek stopped, realizing there was nowhere to run. Brianna's composure shattered completely. She leaped to her feet, her face twisted with rage. All pretenses of the concerned daughter-in-law abandoned. You recorded me, she screamed at Aaron. You pathetic, spineless coward. After everything I did for you, everything I sacrificed, you betray me like this. She hurled insults at him, words I will not repeat, language that stripped away any remaining illusion of the woman she had pretended to be. Then she turned on me, her eyes blazing with hatred. And you stupid old man sitting there with your dead wife, schemes thinking you've won something. This isn't justice, this is conspiracy against me. Judge Hernandez banged her gavel repeatedly. Order, Mrs. Grant, you will control yourself, or I will have you removed. But Brianna was beyond control. Evelyn reached for her daughter's arm, trying to pull her back into her seat, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Brianna whirled on her mother with equal venom. This was your plan. You said it would work. You said old men were easy, that judges were predictable, that we'd be untouchable. She laughed, a harsh and broken sound. Some teacher you turned out to be the courtroom. Erupted in chaos. Bailiffs moved toward the petitioner's table. Derek made one more attempt to reach the exit and was physically restrained, Evelyn sat frozen her carefully, constructed mask finally crumbling under the weight of her daughter's public accusations. Judge Hernandez's gavel cracked like thunder again and again until silence finally fell. "I've heard enough," she said, her voice cold with authority. "The petition for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented today, I'm referring this matter to the Travis County District Attorney for immediate criminal investigation into conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation." She turned to the bailiffs. "Detain Mrs. Brianna Grant, Mrs. Evelyn Hale, and Mr. Derek Vance pending arraignment." They are not to leave this courthouse, officers approached with handcuffs. Derek submitted quietly, his legal mind already calculating defense strategies. Evelyn rose with dignity, extending her wrists as if this were merely an inconvenience, but Brianna fought, cursing and struggling, until two officers restrained her as they led her past my table. She stopped and stared at me with pure, undiluted hatred. "This isn't over, Luther. I'll appeal. I'll sue. I'll destroy you if it's the last thing I do." I met her gaze calmly, feeling Margaret's presence beside me, her strength flowing through me for me. I said quietly, "It is over." They lead her away, still screaming threats that echoed off the courtroom walls. But as the officers guided Evelyn toward the door, she paused and turned back, unlike her daughter. She was composed, almost serene, wearing a strange smile that sent a chill down my spine. "You think you know everything, don't you, Luther? You think your precious Margaret was some kind of saint?" She laughed softly. "Ask your son what kind of woman Margaret really was. Ask him about how your mother treated her. About the things Eleanor said and did while you looked the other way." Her smile widened. "You don't even know the secrets in your own house." Nora grabbed my arm, her grip firm and grounding. "Don't listen to her. She's trying to poison your victory." But something in Evelyn's words struck a chord, resonating with the photograph I had found, with Pastor Reeves's cryptic comments, with Margaret's whispered confession about knowing what it felt like to be unwanted in her own family. What had Margaret endured that I never knew? 6 months passed like water, finding its way downhill, slowly reshaping the landscape of my life into something new. The trials concluded one by one. Each verdict, another stone in the foundation of justice Margaret had begun building years before her death. Brianna was convicted of conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation and sentenced to 7 years in state prison. Evelyn received 5 years for her role as architect and accomplice. Derek Vance was disbarred, his legal career destroyed, and sentenced to 3 years for his participation in the scheme. The system moved slowly, as systems do, but it moved in the right direction. Aaron emerged from the wreckage of his marriage like a man surfacing from deep water. The therapist he began seeing helped him understand how Brianna had manipulated him, how she had isolated him from his family and reshaped his perception of reality. Over 10 years of careful control, the process was painful. I knew, but necessary. Some wounds must be reopened before they can heal properly. He visits every Sunday. Now we work in the garden together, the same garden where Margaret once grew tomatoes and roses and herbs she used in her cooking. Aaron's hands are learning the soil, learning patience, learning the quiet satisfaction of nurturing something to life afterward. We share meals at the kitchen table and talk about Margaret, about the mother he wishes he had appreciated while she was alive, about the years he lost to Brianna's influence. The conversations are not always easy, but they are honest. That is more than we had before the money. Margaret left by find the fortune she had quietly accumulated over 30 years found its purpose. I established the Margaret Grant Foundation to help elderly victims of financial exploitation, people like Victor Reyes, who had no one to protect them. No wife preparing defenses from beyond the grave. Nora serves on the board channeling her grief over her brother into something constructive, something that honors his memory. By preventing others from suffering his fate together, we speak at community centers and churches throughout Texas, warning seniors about the patterns of predators, teaching families to recognize the signs of isolation and manipulation. I often begin my talks with a simple message that never fails to resonate. My wife saved my life from beyond the grave. She spent years preparing for a battle I didn't know was coming. But not everyone has a Margaret. That's why we're here to be someone's Margaret for those who need protection. On a quiet afternoon in late spring, Pastor Reeves called to say he had something for me. I drove to Grace Fellowship and found him waiting in his office. The same room where he had first told me about Margaret's secrets in his hands was an envelope cream, colored and slightly worn. My name written across the front in Margaret's elegant script. She told me to give this to you when everything was resolved. He said, I think it's time I took the envelope home and opened it alone, sitting in Margaret's favorite chair by the window, where she used to read. The letter inside was 3 pages long, written in her careful hand, dated almost a year before her death. She told me everything when we first married my mother. Eleanor had waged a quiet campaign to push Margaret out of the family. She called Margaret not good enough for her son, questioned her background, her education, her worthiness. To carry the Grant name, she excluded Margaret from family gatherings, with pointed comments about limited space or conflicting schedules. And once in a moment, Margaret never forgot Eleanor had looked her directly in the eyes and said, "You'll never really be a Grant. You're just someone Luther chose before he knew better." I had defended Margaret back then, I remembered now, though I had not understood the depth of what I was defending her from. I had told my mother to be kind, had insisted Margaret be included, had chosen my wife over my family's approval again and again. But I never knew how much those battles meant to her, how close she had come to leaving. How my unwitting protection had given her the strength to stay. "You saved me, Luther," she wrote, "even when you didn't know I needed saving. You stood between me and Eleanor's cruelty without ever seeing the full picture. You chose me every time, and that choice was everything now. Through everything I left behind, I'm saving you. We're even now, my love." We were always, even on the 6-month anniversary of the trial's conclusion. Aaron and I drove together to the cemetery where Margaret rested. Nora met us there, standing respectfully apart as we approached the headstone. I carried fresh white lilies, Margaret's favorite, and laid them gently against the polished granite. Aaron spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "Sorry, Mom, for everything, for the years I wasted, for the things I let Brianna say, for not being the son you deserved. I'm sorry." I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension slowly release from his body. "She forgave you a long time ago, son." She was always ahead of us, always preparing, always protecting, always loving us more than we knew. We stood in silence as the Texas sun broke through the clouds, warming our faces with gentle light. Nora joined us, her presence a reminder that Margaret's reach had extended far beyond our family, touching lives and bringing justice even after death. As we turned to leave, I paused and looked back at the grave. One final time, the lilies glowed white against the green grass, beautiful and alive, just as she would have wanted. "I'm living again, Margaret," I whispered. Just like you wished, the sun continued to shine as we walked away from Margaret's grave that afternoon. 3 people bound together by loss and love and the quiet pursuit of justice. I learned something in those 6 months that I wish I had understood decades earlier. Family is not defined by blood alone. It is defined by the people who stand beside you when the world tries to tear you down, by the hands that reach out when you are falling, by the voices that speak truth when lies would be easier. Margaret taught me that love does not end with death. It transforms it, echoes. It continues to protect long after the heart that held it stops beating. She spent years preparing a shield I never knew I needed, and when the wolves finally came for me, her love was still strong enough to drive them away. If you are watching this and you recognize something in my story, if you see a family member being isolated, manipulated, or slowly separated from the people who love them, please do not look away, speak up, ask questions, be someone's Margaret before it is too late. Elder, financial exploitation destroys more than bank accounts. It destroys dignity, trust, and lives. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below, telling me what you think, and subscribe to our channel, so you never miss another story of justice, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of true family love. Until next time, remember, dignity is all we ever really own. Protect it fiercely.